What's up, guys? I'm DJ Swivel, and on this week's episode of Just the Tips, we're going to be talking about all you need to know about the business of music, your splits, who you're paying, how to get your business set up, all that stuff. We're going to get a little bit in the weeds here, but I promise you it's going to be very helpful if you're getting started. But before we start, make sure you like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, do all the stuff you got to do. Run the intro. What's up, guys? I'm DJ Swivel, and we're back for another episode of Just the Tips. And this week's episode is all about the business of music. I thought this would be a great video to piggyback off of the last Just the Tips, which was about studio etiquette. Well, before you get to the studio, you got to make sure your business is in order first, which I mentioned on that last video. So I thought this video could be all about how you structure that business. Obviously, the business changes depending on your role. I'm going to try to give general tips here and sort of address all roles. You know, whether you're a songwriter, a producer, an engineer, a mixer, hopefully we can sort of demystify all of that for you guys. So regardless of the role that you play, the first thing you want to do is set up a business entity. Now, if you're in the US, that typically means setting up an LLC, usually a sole proprietorship. Maybe you have a production partner, you set up a LLC as a partnership. If you're in another country, you know, every country has their own way of doing things, but make sure you set up a business entity. Pretty much every country has the ability to do this. And so you got to make sure that you have your business in order, you have a company set up. And, you know, in setting up a company, there's going to be fees. I know in the US, you have to, you know, you have to register it in a state, and you have to do some sort of announcement in like a trade magazine or something like that, usually for it to go into effect. And every country is going to have their own set of rules. But first things first, get a business set up. And the second thing you have to do in that, especially in the US, I don't want to speak for outside of the US, so I'll speak more to my experience here, is you want to set up an EIN number. Now, what an EIN number is, it's an employer identification number. And what that basically means is it's a tax identification number that is specifically for businesses. Whereas as an individual, you would have your social security number, or in Canada, for example, your social insurance number. And I'm sure there's a different version of that for every country. In the US, it's your social insurance number, but for businesses, it's an EIN. So you got to make sure you get an EIN as well, so that the government, when you're being taxed, your EIN is associated with your business registration, and they are in lock and step together. So get your business set up, get your EIN, and then the next thing is you want to get your vendor forms handled with whatever record company you're dealing with. So if you're a mix engineer and you're working with all the different record labels, every record label has their own way of handling business. Typically, the major labels, they make you sign a vendor ID form. So you're filling out all your vendor information, which typically involves your EIN number, your business name, your address, your phone number, email, all that sort of stuff. And usually that comes with a banking form, because typically most labels now, they don't want to mail you a check. They want to pay you direct deposit. And so you got to provide banking details, which means I did sort of skip a step here, but after you get your business registered and your EIN, you need to open a bank account. You have to open a checking account so that under your business name, not your personal name. And then on your vendor forms with the record company, you would provide all, you know, your account info, your routing, your account number, all that good stuff, so that they can pay you directly. And that's what you want, because typically labels will take, you know, months sometimes to pay. And so if you have these forms set up, it just means that you're going to get paid quicker, get paid easier, and you're not going to be chasing down that money, which, you know, we've all had to do sometimes. So, so get your bank account set up, get your vendor forms set up. And in addition to just the record label vendor forms, depending on your role, if you're a songwriter or a producer, you also have to go and get set up with a performing rights organization. So in the US, we're talking ASCAP, we're talking BMI. In Canada, you have SOCAN. In the UK, you have PRS. Every country has their own performing rights organization. And if you are a songwriter or a producer, if you intend to receive publishing on any song that you work on, and the reason I say a producer or songwriters is typically engineers will not get publishing unless they contribute to the songwriting of the song. But either way, you need to make sure you are set up with a PRO, with a performing rights organization. So that means registering with ASCAP, registering with BMI, and also registering with SoundExchange, which handles a lot of the online streaming stuff. With ASCAP, BMI, and CSAC, which are the three majors in the US, you're only going to pick one of those. So you got to pick one. But then also you're going to add SoundExchange. So you're going to set up one of those first three if you're in the US, plus create a SoundExchange account. And all of this is just general housekeeping so that when those royalties start coming in, all of your business is set up so it can seamlessly come into you. Because otherwise, if you don't have these accounts set up, the royalties are still coming in, but they don't know where to go, which means they will get held in an account at ASCAP or BMI or SoundExchange or anywhere. They'll get held in an account there until somebody claims them. So you got to make sure you have all these registrations set up so that you can claim that income. So after that, let's talk a little bit about the other layer of songwriting, which is making sure you have a publishing entity. Now, setting up with ASCAP or BMI, yes, that is going to allow you to collect your performance royalties. It might come in, a little bit slower, but what they're not going to collect on is your mechanical royalties. As a songwriter or a producer, you are able to receive mechanical royalties. Those royalties need to be collected directly from the record company. And this is where having a publisher step in is very, very helpful. Having a publishing company come and step in and help you, so UMPG, Universal Music Publishing Group, Sony ATV, Warner Chappell, those are the three biggest, Concord Music Publishing, that's who I'm with, or a Cobalt, which is sort of an independent aiming publisher. There's lots of publishers out there, but finding somebody to be your kind of eyes and ears to go and collect the money for you is really, really important. Because primarily your job as a creator, your job is to produce or write or mix or whatever it is that you're doing. You want to have somebody else handle that business and go and collect for you, because they are collecting from countries all around the world. And in order for you to do that on your own, you essentially have to set up those same entities that I said, ASCAP, BMI in the US, you now have to set those up around the world with all of the various publishing, performing rights organizations. And so that is typically way more effort than any one individual wants to take on. And so you want to have a publishing company come in and handle that for you. Typically in a publishing deal, if they're giving you an advance and paying you money, you're probably going to be in a 50-50 co-publishing agreement. And if they're not paying you any money, you might be able to put yourself into an administration deal where a publisher might only take, 10 or 15%, and in some cases even less than that. And their entire job is just to go and collect your money. They are just an administrator. Whereas if you do a co-publishing agreement, not only are they handling the administration, but in a 50-50 deal where they're paying you, they're also helping you with the creative. They're almost like acting as a second manager. They're helping set you up with sessions with other songwriters, other producers, getting you in with artists. They might get sync briefs like, this brand over here wants a commercial that sounds like this, and they've asked us to put it together. And, they'll send it to all their writers so you can, put that audio together and maybe have a shot at getting a big sync license. So that's kind of the two differences in a co-publishing and an admin deal. But regardless, you need to have a publisher collecting your money for you. So that's sort of the next step in it. And then after that, the next thing is now you're ready to get in the studio. All your business is set up. Your banking is set up. All your organizational forms are handled. So all that money can flow smoothly. But now you have to handle the business directly with the artist or record label, whoever your client is. And that typically involves having a manager and just negotiating a deal that both parties find fair. If you're a new creator, maybe you don't have a manager. In that case, you can negotiate these things yourself, but you want to have a general understanding of how things work so that you are at least operating with the industry expectations. Because as a new producer creator, you're not likely to have the power or clout to change the typical billing practices or business practices of a record company or artist. So let me do a quick breakdown on how everybody will typically get paid. And let's start with a recording engineer. If you're a recording engineer and you're going in to record an artist, you're typically going to be paid in one of two ways, either an hourly rate or a day rate. And if you're billing an hourly rate, it might be, again, this depends entirely on who the artist is, but let's just say it's $50 an hour. You will get that $50 an hour, but there's usually a point where after X number of hours, you'll double your rate or get time and a half. Because I've been in plenty of sessions where I've been in the studio for 24 hours straight. And if you're doing like a 12-hour session, okay, you bill your normal hourly rate. But after 12 hours, now you will very likely double your rate, or at least like time and a half your rate. So you're getting $75 an hour for every hour after 12, or maybe $100 an hour for every hour after 12 hours. So that's how an engineer works. Or you just do a day rate. Let's say it's $600 for the day, but that day rate is capped at a certain number of hours. So typically it's 12. So you'll do a 12-hour session for a day rate at $50 an hour. That's $600. And then if you do more than the 12, you'll start billing hourly for that. If you are a mix engineer, and by the way, recording engineers do not receive royalties or anything of the sort. They just get their fee and that's it. The mix engineers, however, often do get royalties. So for a mix engineer, you are most often going to charge for a mix, just for a song, right? Some mix engineers do. I personally don't. I don't differentiate between how many tracks are in the song or how much time, the length of time of the song, unless it's something very obvious where it's like, it's a 8-minute song and it's actually like two totally different beats, and halfway through the beat changes and there's new vocals and you're kind of mixing two songs. Well, in that case, you might have to bill them for two songs, right? And I'm thinking of, rare circumstance here, but certain like Kanye songs that are like an 8-minute long song, that might end up being actually two songs. But either way, you're going to bill for a song, and that's typically going to be a flat rate. So depending on where you are, it could be in, hundreds of dollars or thousands of dollars, or, in some cases, if you're at the top of the top, you might get $10,000 for a mix for a song. That's fairly rare, but it does exist, and that's generally how a mixer will bill. But then in addition to that, a mixer will often ask for what is called a point. So a point on the song is 1% of the essentially the net royalty derived from the song, from the master side. And so that 1% is usually recoupable against your your fee. So if you have a fee of $1,000, you have to recoup $1,000 before the record company will start paying you on that royalty. And sometimes that is prospective, although that's really not the way that it should be done. In most cases, they will pay you retroactive from the first record sold. So once you recoup, you actually start getting the royalties from record one instead of, whatever record it took to make that $1,000 back. Record 10,000 or 100,000 or whatever. So that's how a mixer will work. And in order to do that, a mixer will have to sign a contract. So now you start adding a legal layer to this, and you're going to need a good lawyer to be able to read those contracts, decipher them, and make sure that everything is done fairly. Whereas a recording engineer usually doesn't have to deal with a whole lot of contractual stuff because there's no royalties in place. It's just send an invoice, get paid, and you're done. So a mixer will get that contract, and that will include the 1 point royalty that is paid from the record label, but also usually a sound exchange letter of direction. And basically what that means is the artist is writing on a document saying, I am giving permission for sound exchange to give X portion, depending on what your deal is, X portion of this song paid directly to the mix engineer. And so in your contract for a mixing deal, usually at the end, you'll have a sound exchange form. The artist will sign off on it. They'll submit it to sound exchange, and now sound exchange will pay you on those royalties. They will pay you directly. So you don't have to go and collect it from the artist. All right, now let's move on to a producer. In the case of a producer, you have some added rights that are included, which is usually publishing. So a producer and a mixer deal is very often going to be pretty close to the same. Now the producer rate, the fee, might be higher because they're generally doing a little more work than a mixer is. And usually a producer will get between 3 and 6 points. If you're an all-star producer, like, if you're like a hit boy, you're probably getting like 5 or 6 points on a song. But if you're a brand new producer, you're probably getting 3. So a mixer will get 1, a producer will get 3. And other than that, it's the same thing. Same type of contract, same sound exchange letter of direction. That'll all happen and you'll get paid your 3 points. But then in addition to that, if the producer created the whole beat, they very likely will have a significant portion of the publishing on the song. So now we add that whole other layer, which we talked about, making sure you have a publishing company, making sure you're set up with ASCAP, BMI, or whatever performing rights organization is in your country, and they will collect on that money there. So that's how a producer's deal is set up. And then finally, a songwriter's deal. If you're a songwriter, meaning you're going in and you're working with a producer and you're just generally writing lyric and melody, songwriters, it's a little strange, but songwriters don't actually get paid. Certainly not directly as a fee, the way that a mixer or a producer gets a fee. Songwriters only generally get paid on their publishing revenue. And so it's much more important for a songwriter to make sure they have their publishing business in order so that they are easily able to every quarter collect on that money. And that's kind of how a songwriter's business works, is they just write a ton of songs, get as many placements as they can, and all of that, those revenues, those royalties, they add up. The more songs you have, the more it adds up, and then every quarter they're getting checks. So songwriters actually do get regular checks, but of course you got to work on things that do well enough to generate some money for you. So that's kind of how the 4 main roles in the studio work. And after that, you want to kind of, if you're a producer, if you're a songwriter, you want to figure out how do you handle your splits. There's only 100% of a song. And when you're in the studio with an artist and you're writing something and creating, there's a lot of different ways that you can break up the splits. But I found if 4 people are in the room writing and everyone is kind of contributing equally, you typically will just split it 4 ways. But there are some instances where that might not make sense. And so at the end of the day, there is no strict rule here. It really just comes down to what you can negotiate with everybody. But there is some best practices. And I think the easiest way to handle publishing is just split it evenly. If 5 people wrote, everybody gets 20%. Here's where you get a little bit of a rub. If there's one producer who makes the entire track, and then you have 4 songwriters all collaborating on lyric and melody, in that case, it might not be so fair to split it 20% 5 ways, because that producer created the entire track. And so oftentimes I'll see the beat, the track represents 50, and the songwriting represents 50, and then doing equal splits over that 50. So if there's 3 producers making a beat, that 50% would get split 3 ways. If there's 5 songwriters just working on the top line, then that 50% will be split 5 ways. So like 10% each. And that I think is a little more fair way to do it. But again, at the end of the day, there's no strict rule here. It's just whatever you can kind of negotiate. There is one other way where you can do it. And this way, it's not personally my favorite way of doing things, but sometimes it's necessary if you have a lot of different collaborators and none of them were in the room together and it's all done remotely, which quite often is how things happen in the K-pop world. In that case, they will usually do splits based on how much of what you contributed was used. So they will, in many cases, actually time out. Like, oh, if you wrote the whole chorus and it happens 3 times, that equals, a minute and 37 seconds of playtime, and the song is, 3 minutes. All right, you're going to have roughly, 50% of that songwriter share. So which would be, in this case, 25%, right? So songwriter half is 50, and then half of that, 25. And so that's one way of doing it. It's that tends to be a little over complex and can be challenging to get done. And sometimes, you have layers that, where songwriters do share parts. And that could be a bit of a challenge, but that in some cases, that's sort of a requirement on how you work. So that's how you would do your publishing splits. And then other than that, is just focus on having a good session, being creative, and not really stressing too much about the business. If you have a manager, they will oversee all of this for you. If you're too new in your career where you haven't found a manager yet, maybe you want to start looking for somebody who's coming up alongside you and is willing and wants to be a manager and wants to take on that role with you. But usually you will have somebody else who's really helping you with this because it can be overwhelming and there can be a lot of complexity. And then the final 2 layers to this is often in music, you will have a business manager, which is different than your manager, and of course your lawyer. And I'll just briefly touch on how those 2 roles, what they handle and how they typically function. A business manager basically handles all of your money. Every dollar that comes in, every dollar that goes out, they have access to your bank accounts. They file your taxes for you and make sure that they manage your finances. They manage your business world from a financial perspective. So you're not getting a big check, going and buying a crazy expensive car, and then you don't have enough money to pay your taxes. They make sure that when money comes in, they put the taxes aside right away. They're going to pay taxes on a quarterly basis, estimated taxes, so that you don't incur any penalties at the end of the year. And they're going to just generally structure your business in a way that is going to take all of that pressure off you so you can focus on being a creative. And usually, for that service, a business manager will take 5%. 5% of every dollar that comes in to your business will go directly to them. By the way, your actual manager will usually take somewhere between 15 and 20. So, I didn't mention that before, but manager between 15 and 20, business manager 5, and then your lawyer, most lawyers in music now do 5% deals. So rather than billing, for every single contract that they read, every single deal that you get done, them, doing hourly and them being on retainer, they will just do a 5% deal and they will take 5% of every dollar that comes in and they will handle all of the legal required to ensure that your business is running smoothly. So that can also be a huge convenience for a lot of artists, creators, mixers, producers, what have you. So when you think about it, you have 100% pie of all the money you earn. Right off the bat, your manager might get 20, your business manager gets 5, your lawyer gets 5. Right off the bat, only 70% of every dollar you make is going to you as a creator. Then you have to pay taxes. And if you're doing well in your career, you might be in the highest tax bracket. Living in California, California has the highest state income tax, has so basically the highest tax in the nation. And if you're in the highest income tax bracket, you could be paying 50% of your earnings on taxes. So now that 70 that you're left with is now only 35. So you got to be really careful about how you spend your money and what type of spending habits that you have. This is why a good business manager can be helpful. because they will be able to prepare you for actually how much money you make. And once you have this whole team around, you are only going to typically see about 35% of that, and the rest of it's going to go to supporting your business. So that's a really important key to know and think about when you're getting into this business. Like, if you make $100,000 on a giant sync, which is very possible, you are not going to make $100,000. You do not have $100,000 to spend. You might only have $35,000 that is free for you to spend, and the rest of it is going to go to taxes and your team. So be aware of that, be cognizant of it, and other than that, that kind of covers the majority of the business aspects of music. So I hope that was helpful. I hope we didn't get too far into the weeds. I try to keep it very general. Of course, in business, everything is unique and there's always unique situations, but this is kind of the general rule that applies to most creative professionals in the music industry. So I hope that was helpful, and we will do another Just the Tips, probably back in Pro Tools or in the studio on the next one. But I'll see you guys in 3 weeks. Peace.